He came to honor tradition, not to prove himself, until Steven Seagal laughed in his face. In front of thousands, Keanu Reeves stood silent, surrounded by whispers of weakness and mockery. But when he finally moved, the entire arena stopped breathing. What happened next turned a peaceful demonstration into a moment the world would never forget. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Tokyo International Martial Arts Expo hadn't been held in 5 years. After a long hiatus, the event had returned bigger than ever, drawing thousands from around the world to the newly constructed Ariake Arena, a gleaming architectural marvel on the waterfront. Designed to host everything from Olympic-level sports to sacred cultural demonstrations, its sleek glass panels reflected the Tokyo skyline, and inside, beneath the soaring steel rafters, banners fluttered with the insignias of hundreds of martial arts schools, each steeped in history. The opening ceremony was already underway. Dignitaries and grandmasters sat in reserved rows, their faces weathered by years of training but glowing with quiet pride. Traditional drums echoed across the arena floor, synchronized with taiko rhythms that seemed to vibrate through the body, not just the ears. Rows of martial arts students in clean white gis sat in precise formation, a sea of discipline and anticipation. High above, the national flags of participating countries hung in respectful stillness. Every detail had been orchestrated with reverence. This wasn't just an event. It was a reunion of philosophies, a summit of respect, and a stage for the timeless question: what does true mastery look like? Backstage, organizers whispered through headsets, adjusting lights, cueing performances, and scanning the day's schedule. There was one name, however, that didn't appear in the official program. One guest whose participation had been kept secret, even from most of the planning committee. It was a name that needed no introduction, no credentials, and no showmanship to earn a stage. He hadn't come for attention. He hadn't come to impress. He had come for one reason only: to quietly honor the art that had shaped his inner world more than any camera or spotlight ever had. Keanu Reeves sat alone in a quiet holding area just off stage, tying the belt of his gi with slow, deliberate precision. There was no entourage, no agent, no makeup artist or bodyguard, just him. A pair of worn sandals sat beside him. His hair was pulled back. His hands rested in his lap. His eyes were closed. The world outside buzzed with cameras, commentary, and electricity, but none of it touched the silence he had built around himself. For over 2 decades, he had trained privately in traditional karate and internal arts, not for roles, not for applause, but for the rhythm and peace they brought to his life. He had declined invitations to perform before, politely, graciously, but always with a firm no. This time, however, something had changed. An old master, one he deeply respected, had reached out with a handwritten letter inviting him not to perform, but to pay tribute. A kata, done without flourish, a gesture of gratitude to the traditions that had kept him grounded through the chaos of fame. Keanu had said yes, not to the show, but to the spirit behind it. Outside the preparation area, the atmosphere was shifting. The crowd of thousands had settled into a buzz of anticipation. Families, students, masters, and martial arts fans filled every section of the arena, their conversations a mix of admiration and curiosity. Near the center of the front row sat a figure dressed in black from head to toe. Steven Seagal. He sat with his arms folded, his tinted glasses resting just below the bridge of his nose. Though the Expo emphasized humility and unity, Seagal's presence was anything but quiet. His entourage flanked him like bodyguards at a press event, some whispering to one another, others scanning the room as if waiting for the spotlight to find them. Cameras tilted in his direction, fans snapped photos, a few even called out his name. Seagal gave a slow nod, acknowledging the attention, but his focus drifted back to the mat. His body language was unmistakable, part relaxed, part alert, and all confidence. He leaned in slightly when the announcer began speaking in both Japanese and English. Welcome, honored guests and martial artists from every corner of the world. Today marks the rebirth of our international gathering. For the next 3 days, we celebrate tradition, innovation, and the spirit that unites all disciplines of martial practice. From the upper seating area, a camera drone hovered for a panoramic view of the crowd. Its quiet whir blended with the applause as spotlights drifted toward the demonstration floor. As the host continued, a quiet buzz began to ripple through the stands. A subtle change in energy, curious whispers, shifting posture, murmured questions. Did you hear the rumor? Keanu Reeves is here. No way, that's just a stunt to get more media. I saw someone backstage who looked just like him. Same posture, same quiet walk. But he doesn't do live events, he never performs. The rumors intensified when a staff member was seen hurrying past with a crisp white gi in their arms. Some fans began scanning the lower tunnels for any sign of him. In one corner, a teenage girl clutched her phone, shaking her head in disbelief. "If he actually steps on that mat," she whispered, "I swear I'm gonna cry." At the edge of the floor, Master Tanaka sat still, eyes closed, listening more with his senses than his ears. The 88-year-old was a revered figure in both traditional karate and Zen philosophy. His students often said he could feel intention before a punch was even thrown, and in this moment he smiled ever so slightly. He knew something was coming, not a fight, not a performance, something quieter, something deeper. A spiritual shift in the rhythm of the day. Backstage, a young coordinator approached Keanu. She bowed respectfully. "Sir, they're ready for you." Keanu opened his eyes. No adrenaline, no rush of nerves, just a calm inhale. He stood, bowed, and stepped toward the entrance. The lights inside Ariete Arena dimmed as a single spotlight illuminated the center of the floor. The announcer's voice dropped into a reverent tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now welcome a guest whose name you may recognize, but whose journey in martial arts has remained largely private. A lifelong student of discipline, respect, and humility. Please welcome Keanu Reeves." The crowd froze. There was a moment, half breath, half disbelief, where no one moved. Then came the eruption. Gasps swept through the arena, followed by a swell of applause so sudden and heartfelt it overwhelmed even the announcer's prepared lines. Phones lifted in unison. Students leaned forward. Master Tanaka's eyes opened, his smile deepening into something proud. Even seasoned martial artists on the sidelines stood and bowed slightly, recognizing that this was no mere celebrity moment. It was a crossing of worlds. Keanu stepped onto the mat barefoot, the soles of his feet touching the polished floor with quiet reverence. He wore a simple white gi, devoid of markings. No belts, no insignias, no studio logos. Only a man and the tradition he came to honor. His walk was steady, each step intentional. He bowed once to the judges' table, again to the mat, and once more toward the front row, where Steven Seagal sat motionless, arms still crossed. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of Seagal's mouth. He whispered something to the man beside him. The man chuckled nervously. The mic didn't pick it up, but the disrespect was loud enough for the silence to catch it. Keanu didn't flinch, his eyes focused ahead, on an invisible horizon beyond the crowd. Then, he stood still. Perfectly still. The hush that followed was profound. Thousands of people watching, not with noisy expectation, but with breathless stillness. There was something sacred in the pause before the kata, a meditation before movement, a clearing of the mind. Then, with a single breath, Keanu began. His body moved slowly, each motion drawn from years of disciplined practice. His back was straight, limbs extended with precision, feet gliding in rhythm with ancient form. This was not performance. It was transmission. His hands blocked, swept, extended. His body twisted into a downward strike, then returned to center with fluid balance. He was not acting, he was not entertaining. He was remembering the discipline that saved him during grief, the patterns that gave him peace when the world felt overwhelming, the rhythm that brought him home to himself. Every motion bore the weight of years unseen. From the front row, Seagal watched, stone-faced but watchful. The smirk was gone, replaced with something more calculating. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched. In reverent silence, a man on the mat, a life in motion, a form passed down through generations. And somewhere between the rise and fall of his stance, between the breath and the balance, they began to feel something none of them expected. This wasn't about who was stronger. This was about who was centered. And the real story was only just beginning. Keanu stood alone at the center of the polished wooden floor. Every seat in the arena was filled, but the space around him felt infinite. He bowed once to the judges, seated along the left side of the arena. Then he turned to the elderly masters, bowing even lower. Finally, he faced the mat itself and bowed again. Each gesture was unhurried, deliberate, and respectful, an offering of humility to the art form, to the ancestors, to every unseen teacher who had passed on the tradition. He stood upright again, feet shoulder-width apart, arms relaxed at his sides. For a few seconds, he did nothing. Then his right foot slid back. His arms rose into guard, and the kata began. Basai Dai. Its name, roughly translated, meant to storm a fortress. It wasn't about violence. It was about courage, facing resistance, breaking through, earning entry not with brute force, but with unwavering presence. The form was ancient, older than the lights and cameras that surrounded him, older than the stadium, older than any of the spectators watching. Keanu's movements flowed like water over stone, slow at first, then suddenly sharp, a block rising like a wave, a strike cutting through the air, a pivot, precise and grounded. Each step was connected to the earth, each breath timed with transition. His gi whispered with movement, but his feet made almost no sound. He didn't move like an actor preparing for a scene. He moved like a student offering his whole heart to the art that had shaped him. Some of the audience leaned forward instinctively. They had seen demonstrations before, many with more spectacle, more flips, more noise. But something about Keanu's form felt different. His pace wasn't showy. His focus was complete. And the longer he moved, the quieter the crowd became. The stance changed. A mid-level strike snapped into position, then faded into a parry. A forward thrust dissolved into a backward sweep. His movements were strong but without tension, powerful but without aggression. This wasn't a kata being performed for approval. It was being lived. In the front row, Steven Seagal remained still, arms folded over his chest, face unreadable behind tinted glasses. One of his entourage leaned in and whispered something. Seagal didn't reply at first. Then, just loud enough to be heard in the few rows nearby, he let out a low laugh. A few people turned toward him. It wasn't the laugh itself that carried through the arena. It was the timing. The way it broke the sacred quiet that had formed around Keanu's movement like a protective shell. The sound of that quiet laugh echoed longer than it should have. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. In a space where silence had been earned by discipline and reverence, any disruption cut sharper than words. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. Others cast glances toward the front row, unsure if they'd imagined it. Keanu continued, unfazed. His back remained straight as he executed the next movement. A high block, followed by a sweeping low kick and a returning centerline strike. His breath guided the rhythm. Inhale, move, exhale, return. There was no shift in his expression, no subtle twitch, no hesitation. The mockery didn't touch him. Not because he ignored it, but because he had already released the need to be seen. It wasn't about proving anything. It never had been. A camera zoomed in on his face, eyes soft but focused, jaw relaxed. The kind of expression that revealed nothing and yet somehow conveyed everything. Every transition flowed seamlessly into the next. There was no moment when one could say, "Now he's beginning a new technique." They simply unfolded one from another, like thoughts in meditation. A second chuckle came, slightly louder this time, more forced. This time it wasn't just the martial artists who noticed. Even those in the upper rows turned their heads toward the sound. A ripple passed through the crowd, a mix of awkward laughter, uncomfortable glances, and rising tension. Steven Seagal leaned toward his companion and said something neither respectful nor subtle. The man next to him laughed nervously again, looking around to see who might be watching. Seagal reclined in his seat like a man who had already decided the value of what he was watching. Keanu didn't change pace. He stepped into the most complex section of the kata now, a tight series of blocks and counters that required rapid shifts in balance and direction. He lowered his body center, turning sharply into a cross stance, his arms sweeping like wind through tall grass. One hand chambered tightly to his ribs, the other extending into a knife-hand block that landed with quiet finality. The martial artists in the room could see it. His stances were deep and correct, his transitions were clean. His control was absolute. Even those who didn't know the form instinctively understood they were watching something refined, something practiced not in studios filled with mirrors, but in solitude. The kata reached a high point, a sequence meant to symbolize breaking through the inner gate, the moment when resistance is no longer external, but inside oneself. The breath changed. The posture opened. Keanu's arms swept upward, then snapped into a guarding position, his body coiled and ready, not for war, but for resolve. In that instant, the arena held its breath again. The final sequence of Basai Dai unfolded like a memory whispered into motion. Keanu shifted his weight back, pivoted, and landed in a low horse stance, both fists drawn to his sides. There was no drama in the finish, just clarity. A clean, rooted block that brought the entire form full circle. His spine straightened, his hands lowered, his body returned to stillness. The same place it began. He bowed once, slowly, deeply, and held it for a beat longer than expected. When he rose, he didn't look for applause. He didn't scan the audience. He simply stepped back from the center of the mat and bowed again to the elders seated along the edge. The silence after his bow was different than before. It wasn't a hush of anticipation. It was a silence that followed something sacred, the kind that wrapped itself around everyone watching, even the skeptics. Then, like a spark catching flame, the applause began. Not thunderous, not frenzied, but growing, honest, and warm. People stood, some bowed from their seats, others clapped softly, reverently. In the front row, one of the oldest senseis, a former kata champion in his youth, pressed his palms together and nodded slowly, the kind of nod that said, "I saw you. I understood." Keanu stepped off the mat as quietly as he had entered. But not all stood. Steven Seagal remained seated, arms still folded. His face wore an expression of mild amusement, as if what he had witnessed was an elaborate stage play rather than a sincere demonstration. The smirk returned, a slow, deliberate crossing of one leg over the other. He leaned slightly to the side and whispered once more to the man beside him. This time, the camera caught it. Pretty, but useless. The man nodded, unsure whether to agree or stay neutral. He settled for an awkward smile. Up in the stands, the whisper traveled quickly. Someone had caught it on video. Phones lit up again. Whispers turned into chatter. Did he just say that? Was that about Keanu? One of the instructors from a Brazilian jiu-jitsu academy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't a karate practitioner, but he knew discipline when he saw it. He had seen the control in Keanu's movement, the intention, the humility. "Pretty but useless," he muttered under his breath. "That's not how a real master speaks." Backstage, Keanu removed his belt slowly, folding his gi top with care. He could hear the applause still fading behind him. But he didn't rush to re-enter the spotlight. That wasn't why he came. He had done what he came to do. Pay homage. Nothing more. But out on the floor, something had shifted. Because the smirk hadn't gone unnoticed. And the words, however quietly spoken, had been heard. The air was changing. Respect had been given. Now it was being tested. The applause was fading when it happened. Keanu had just bowed for the final time and disappeared behind the curtain when Steven Seagal rose from his front row seat. Not with urgency, not with grace, but with calculated timing. His body language was relaxed, his posture exaggeratedly casual, like a man stretching after a long nap. He clapped slowly, once, then twice, drawing attention before even opening his mouth. It wasn't applause, it was performance. The crowd, unsure of what to make of it, fell into an awkward silence. A few people glanced around, puzzled. Others looked directly at Seagal, sensing something was about to shift. The announcer, Takashi Mori, approached the center of the mat, ready to introduce the next demonstration, when Seagal raised a hand and called out, "Hold on, Takashi, if I may." Takashi paused mid-step, uncertain. His earpiece buzzed with chatter from the control booth, unsure whether to allow the interruption. But Seagal was already stepping forward, reaching with familiar confidence toward the microphone. "Mr. Reeves has certainly given us a display," Seagal began, his voice smooth and commanding. "I'd say it was beautiful, graceful, a little like theatrical yoga with just a sprinkle of Hollywood flair." A wave of uneasy murmurs rippled through the audience. Some chuckled, others turned to each other in disbelief. A few students, dressed in their crisp gis, visibly recoiled. One instructor in the fifth row narrowed his eyes, sensing the tension shift into something more dangerous. Seagal paced slowly across the mat, the microphone resting comfortably in his hand. His entourage remained in their seats, but their expressions betrayed anticipation, like a pack waiting for their leader's move. "Now don't get me wrong," Seagal continued, raising his hands with exaggerated innocence. "There's a place for forms and rituals, for bowing to the mat, for deep breathing and poetic movements." He paused. "But let's not confuse performance with practicality." The words landed like a slap. Because out here in the real world, where danger doesn't give you time to pose, what matters is effectiveness. And effectiveness doesn't come from pretty stances. It comes from pressure, resistance, reaction. A few people nodded, mostly younger men in casual clothes who had grown up watching Seagal's films. But a louder murmur of discomfort was beginning to swell. Takashi stepped forward, clearly trying to regain control. "Thank you, Mr. Seagal, but we do have a schedule." Seagal cut him off with a wave. "No offense, Takashi, but since we're all gathered here to explore what martial arts truly are, why don't we give the audience a real demonstration?" He turned and faced the crowd, arms open wide. Not a performance, not a poem in motion, a true comparison, a friendly exchange of technique. "Me and Mr. Reeves." All eyes turned toward the stage entrance, waiting, watching, and just beyond the curtain, Keanu Reeves stood still. Keanu stepped back onto the mat with a grace that was quiet and unshaken. He didn't rush, didn't tense. His walk was as relaxed as his kata had been, centered, balanced, grounded in something deeper than pride. As he approached Takashi and Seagal, the crowd leaned forward, hungry for what might come next. He stopped a few feet from Seagal. Not too close, not too far. The distance between them spoke volumes. Keanu looked toward Takashi first and offered a respectful nod. Then his eyes shifted to Seagal. Not with challenge, not with defensiveness, but with composure. "I didn't come to fight," he said calmly, his voice clear, steady. "I came to honor the art." The words were simple, but they hit with quiet force. Some members of the audience clapped softly in response. Others remained silent, uncertain how to interpret what they were witnessing. Was this humility or avoidance? Wisdom or evasion? Seagal tilted his head, smiling like a man who had just been handed the upper hand. "Of course you did," he said, "and I respect that, in theory. But theory doesn't hold up in real confrontation." He stepped forward a little, still holding the mic, letting his voice project. "You see, I've trained with police forces around the world. I've walked into situations where hesitation meant harm, where philosophy meant nothing. What mattered was control, precision, outcome." He gestured toward the crowd. "I think they deserve to see what that looks like." He turned his head slightly, speaking into the mic, but keeping his eyes on Keanu. "Don't worry, no hard hits, just a friendly demonstration, a side-by-side contrast. You show your way, I'll show mine. Let's give them something worth remembering." A strange mixture of tension and excitement rippled through the arena. Cameras zoomed in, phones lifted higher. On social media, live streams were already capturing every word. Takashi hesitated, clearly caught between honoring the structure of the event and the drama unfolding before him. He looked toward the side of the mat, where Master Tanaka sat unmoving, watching closely. Keanu took a breath, long and quiet. His shoulders relaxed. He looked directly at Seagal, not with resistance, but with clarity. "If you need to demonstrate your way," he said softly, "I won't stop you. But for me," he added, "martial arts isn't about showing who's right. It's about living by what's right." More silence followed. The crowd didn't quite know how to respond. Then, from somewhere in the middle rows, someone began clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Martial arts students, instructors, elders. It wasn't loud, but it was firm. They understood what had just happened. Keanu hadn't backed down. He'd simply refused to lower his path. Seagal smiled, but the glint in his eyes flickered for just a moment. Because restraint, when held with strength, can be louder than any punch. Seagal turned slightly, facing the crowd again. His voice rang with practiced confidence, but a trace of something unsettled lingered beneath the surface. "Well, there you have it," he said, raising the mic as if to deliver the final word. "Some people come here to preserve tradition. Others come to move it forward." A few cheers broke out. Others remained quiet. He handed the microphone back to Takashi with a smirk and stepped off to the side of the mat, making no attempt to mask his satisfaction. His message had been delivered. Loud, public, impossible to ignore. But Keanu didn't respond with words. He bowed again, to Takashi, to the audience, and finally to Seagal. Then he walked off the mat with the same quiet grace he had walked on with. No one said anything for a moment. The air felt suspended, caught between tension and admiration, as if the entire arena was still processing what they had just witnessed. Backstage, Keanu returned to the preparation area and sat down slowly, taking a small towel from beside his bag. A few event staff nodded to him as they passed, unsure whether to speak. The silence around him was not awkward. It was respected. It was earned. Meanwhile, Takashi, now holding the mic again, addressed the audience with a tone that tried to pull the event back into its intended rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Let us remember the purpose of this gathering is to honor the many forms martial arts take, from their origins to their evolution, from quiet discipline to practical adaptation." He looked out across the crowd, then added, "There is value in all paths, but even greater value in how we walk them." The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was thoughtful. The program moved forward, but the moment lingered, like smoke after a fire. In the front row, Seagal sat back down, folding his arms again. The smile remained, but it had lost some of its edge. His gaze flicked back toward the curtain where Keanu had disappeared. One of his younger students leaned in, whispering with hesitation, "He handled that pretty well?" Seagal said nothing at first. Then, under his breath, he muttered, "He didn't handle anything. He just avoided it." But the words didn't sound as sure as they once might have. Across the arena, Master Tanaka still sat quietly, his expression unreadable. But his eyes hadn't moved from the center of the mat. He had watched every step, every word, every silence. And somewhere deep within the discipline honed over decades, he knew this wasn't over. The true test had only just begun. Takashi Mori stood at the center of the mat, microphone in hand, smiling politely as if nothing unusual had just occurred. His voice came through the speakers with practiced calm, the kind honed through years of moderating events that occasionally teetered on the edge of chaos. "Let us continue today's celebration of martial arts," he said, gesturing toward the schedule board projected on the overhead screens. "Up next we have—" But his words were drowned out by a sudden wave of murmurs rising from the lower stands. The buzz wasn't background noise anymore. It was sharp, restless, unmistakable. Something had shifted, and it wasn't going back to normal. A teenager in the third row cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Reeves is scared." Another voice joined from the opposite side, louder, braver, maybe foolish. "He backed down." Then came the worst one. Seagal called him out, and he walked away. Takashi hesitated. He tried to continue the program, but the undercurrent was too strong now. The chant hadn't started yet, but it was forming in the air, waiting for one person to ignite it. Backstage, Keanu sat still, but he could hear everything. The applause, the hush, the murmurs, now twisted and reshaped by ego, misunderstanding, and expectation. He had bowed in peace, but they saw it as retreat. Two crew members at the curtain whispered nervously as the sound from the arena grew more charged. One of them checked their phone, the screen already buzzing. "Keanu, it's trending." He turned to them calmly. "What's trending?" The staffer showed him. "Reeves vs. Seagal." Keanu stared at it for a second. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He looked back toward the arena, then toward the long hallway where the quiet rooms lay. For a moment, he considered walking that direction, not out of avoidance, but because it was where the noise didn't matter. But before he could move, Takashi's voice echoed again. "Let us remember," the host said, louder now, "that the martial arts teach us restraint, respect, harmony." He tried to speak over the murmuring, but the chants had begun. It started with one row. "Let them spar, let them spar." Then 2, then 10. Soon it was the whole arena. The chant swallowed the music. It overpowered the announcer. Even the elders seated along the sides began to shift uncomfortably. Master Tanaka, however, remained still. His eyes scanned the crowd, the energy, the noise. He had lived through generations of martial arts being misunderstood, commodified, turned into combat sport and spectacle. But he had also seen moments, rare, crystalline moments, when a true practitioner could turn that tide. His gaze turned slowly toward the back curtain, where Keanu now stood. Their eyes met. No words, just a single nod from the old master. Permission. Guidance. A quiet call to action. Keanu walked back onto the mat, not with swagger, not with defiance, but with the same calm he had carried since the moment he arrived in Tokyo. The chanting quieted slightly as people noticed his reappearance. Phones lifted instantly, screens lit up. Every step he took was captured by hundreds of lenses, each image already destined to be dissected, clipped, shared, and speculated on. Steven Seagal remained standing at the edge of the mat, arms folded across his chest, waiting. He had never sat back down after his theatrical applause. His smirk remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed just a little as Keanu approached. Perhaps he hadn't expected him to return so soon, or at all. Keanu reached the center just beside Takashi and motioned gently for the mic. Takashi hesitated, then handed it to him. For a second, Keanu looked out at the sea of faces. Some were hungry for conflict, some were confused, some, especially the elders, looked disappointed. He took a breath, then spoke softly but clearly. "I didn't come here to fight." A ripple moved through the crowd again. The tension spiked. Some faces hardened, others turned away, annoyed. "I came to honor the art," he continued, "to show what it's given me, to bow to those who taught before me and those who will carry it after I'm gone." He turned slightly toward Steven. "I never thought this was about proving anything." That sentence landed like a still bell in a storm. For a brief moment, even Seagal's smirk faltered. Keanu handed the mic back to Takashi and turned as if to walk off again. But that's when Master Tanaka slowly stood from his seat. His white eyebrows lifted slightly, and he raised his hand, not to stop Keanu, but to speak. Takashi immediately offered the mic. The elder's voice, though thin, was crisp and carried clearly. "There are two forms of strength, one that wishes to dominate, and one that endures quietly." He looked at Keanu, then at Seagal. "It is not weakness to walk away, but it can be wisdom to meet a challenge when the world misunderstands your silence." He paused, then added with careful weight, "Let the demonstration continue, if it remains a demonstration." The crowd held its breath. Keanu turned slowly back toward the mat's center. He didn't smile, he didn't posture. He simply said, "Not a fight, a demonstration of differing philosophies." Those words weren't defensive. They were clear, measured, peaceful, but they were also unshakable. A roar erupted through the arena. The chant returned, but this time it was celebration, not provocation. The atmosphere had changed. The crowd wasn't getting a fight. They were about to witness something more profound. Takashi bowed and gestured toward the center of the mat. Keanu moved toward his corner. Seagal rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck with exaggerated flair, heading to his side with deliberate slowness. The two men stood across from each other, still, silent, a world of difference between them, and everyone could feel it. From every angle, the arena felt charged. There were no flashing lights, no fireworks, no pounding music. Just silence, like the hush before a storm. The mat was now sacred ground. Two men, two legacies, two ways of being. Keanu bowed, low and deliberate. Steven dipped his head, barely. Already the contrast spoke louder than words. They stepped toward each other, but not to collide. This was not a match of fists and kicks. This was philosophy in motion. Keanu's stance was relaxed, grounded. His hands opened slightly, calm and receptive. Seagal's posture, by contrast, was aggressive, shoulders squared, hands twitching, waiting for an opportunity to assert dominance. They circled. The crowd leaned forward. Keanu made the first move, not an attack, but a gesture. A gentle sweep of the arm, inviting a reaction. Seagal responded quickly, snapping into a hard forward stance, hand slicing out in a fast linear strike. Keanu turned, not away, but into the energy, redirecting it with a subtle movement of his forearm. No clash, no block, just redirection. The audience gasped. Again, Seagal pressed, this time a sweeping leg meant to unbalance. Keanu shifted, flowing around it like water around a rock. He didn't strike, he didn't retaliate. He demonstrated control through absence. Some began to understand. Each exchange was brief but meaningful. Keanu was not performing, he was expressing. His body was language, his silence was statement. Seagal's movements were effective but forceful, seeking an opening. Keanu offered none. Then came a moment that caught everyone off guard. Seagal lunged forward with a fast arm trap, clearly expecting a block or a strike in return. But instead, Keanu stepped into the space, offering his own balance point. Using his own weight, his own vulnerability, he caused Seagal to overcommit and lose footing. The elder man stumbled, not violently, not comically, but visibly. He recovered fast, his pride flaring in his eyes. Gasps turned to stunned applause. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He stepped back, bowed again, and waited. Takashi raised his hand. The demonstration was complete. The arena rose in a standing ovation, this time not for spectacle, but for something far deeper. The reverence of martial arts, the essence of control without aggression, of confidence without domination. Seagal straightened his collar and walked off the mat without a word. Keanu remained still for a moment longer, then bowed to each side of the arena, finally to Master Tanaka, who had remained standing throughout. The old master bowed in return, the nod of generations recognizing one another. In a world that often demands louder, faster, and stronger, Keanu had given them something rarer. Quiet excellence. And the world had seen it. In the days to come, the videos would go viral. Commentators would debate what it meant. Some would still side with brute strength. But for those who were there in the Ariake Arena that night, one thing was clear. This wasn't about winning. It was about presence. And in that space, Keanu had never stood taller. The crowd hadn't even settled from the last eruption when Seagal took his time, stepping back toward center mat. He rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, and stretched his arms wide like a stage actor preparing for a dramatic monologue. Theatrics met muscle memory. He smiled toward the audience, soaking in the attention. His fans cheered. His critics watched in silence. Keanu didn't move. He stood in quiet readiness, arms at his side, eyes clear, posture grounded. No bounce, no tension, just stillness. Seagal took a step forward, then another, then without warning, launched into his first attack. A flurry of sharp movement, an open palm feint toward the head, followed by a snapping low kick aimed at Keanu's shin. It was fast, flashy, designed to intimidate, to provoke. Keanu did not flinch. His weight shifted just slightly. The kick missed by inches. The feint landed on air. Seagal rotated into a spinning wrist swipe. Flashier this time, a demonstration of control rather than a true attempt to land. But Keanu saw through it. He tilted back, redirecting the motion with the lightest movement of his shoulder. No clash, just evasion. Smooth, measured. The crowd let out its first audible gasp. It wasn't from violence. It was from the absence of it. Seagal pressed again, this time a double strike, left hand probing high, right foot stepping low for balance. But Keanu sidestepped, barely visible. His hands didn't rise to meet force with force. They guided, dissolved, moved with the energy instead of resisting it. A martial arts student in the front row whispered, "That's Tai Chi application, live." Another replied, "No, it's Aikido, look at his footwork." A third added, "That's internal, doesn't matter the style. That's control." The rhythm built. Seagal attacked again, increasing speed, a sweeping horizontal slash of the arm that would have caught most untrained opponents completely off guard. But Keanu didn't meet it head-on. He stepped inward. Yes, inward, dissolving the blow by closing the gap and gently redirecting the forearm away with the back of his hand. Not a strike, not a block, just a soft reroute of intent. Seagal's momentum stalled. He blinked, surprised. Keanu stayed in position. No counterstrike, no glare, just breath. Then it repeated. Seagal advanced again, more aggressive, testing the space with an elbow hook followed by a palm thrust meant to push Keanu off center. Keanu lowered his weight, absorbed the push through his hips, and rotated gently, sending the force behind the strike into the floor. It was like watching someone catch a wave and disappear inside it. Now murmurs were spreading beyond the first rows. Experienced black belts from various dojos leaned forward, eyes wide. "That's internal power, no resistance," one said. Another whispered, "This isn't just demonstration. This is understanding." One sensei in the third row stood with arms crossed, nodding slowly. Seagal was moving harder, faster, but not smarter. Keanu was responding with less, yet doing more. The contrast was growing, and everyone could feel it. Seagal's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to this. He was used to domination, to the crowd reacting with awe after one or two moves, to the sensation of control in his hands, of bodies folding beneath his techniques. But now, the more he attacked, the less certain he became of the outcome. He lunged in again. A fast shoulder bump aimed at Keanu's center mass, followed by a rising strike toward the neck. Keanu didn't retreat. He moved into the space, nullifying the shoulder with a pivot of his own, guiding the strike up and away with a single forearm glide. It looked effortless, almost rehearsed, but everyone watching knew it wasn't. The crowd gasped again. This time the sound carried tension, not from fear, but from admiration. A young Taekwondo student stood frozen in the aisle, eyes wide, whispering to her father. "He's reading the energy. Like water, he's not resisting, just moving through it." Her father nodded, never taking his eyes off the mat. Seagal tried a lock next. A sharp wrist grab, turning into a twisting control motion meant to unbalance Keanu and bring him down. It was the kind of move that had worked in 100 demonstrations, 1,000 dojos, and nearly every action film he'd starred in. But Keanu rotated his wrist at the exact angle of pressure and stepped inward. His shoulder dipped, redirecting the torque and slipping free. His hand didn't retaliate. It simply hovered near Seagal's chest. Perfect placement for a counterstrike. But Keanu didn't take it. He stepped back instead, calm, composed. The move spoke louder than a punch ever could. Now murmurs turned to spoken awe. "Did you see that transition? It could have ended it there. That's restraint." Seagal's face tightened. The edges of his smirk faded. He was sweating now. Barely visible beads on his forehead, but there. His movements grew more erratic, more forceful, less fluid. Another strike, this one reckless. A wide arc meant to displace rather than control. Keanu ducked under it, pivoted around, and tapped Seagal's back gently as he passed, just enough to show he could have done more. The audience caught it. A small, stunned silence swept through the arena. No impact, no blow landed, just proof. Keanu was in control. And it was dawning on everyone, including Seagal. A master from Kyoto leaned forward and whispered, "That's not acting. That's years of internal training, hidden power." Another elder nodded beside him. "True softness defeats false strength." A teenage fan watching through her phone camera whispered, "This is the opposite of what I expected." Keanu stood there, not breathing hard, not gloating, simply waiting. He bowed slightly toward Seagal, inviting peace. But the match wasn't over. Not yet. The energy was shifting. The crowd knew it. So did Seagal. And now he had a decision to make. Would he escalate or evolve? Seagal's pride flared. To back down now would be an admission of something he'd never allowed. Not on film, not in a dojo, and certainly not on this stage. Cameras were rolling, streams were live. His name was trending. And yet, he couldn't deny what his body already knew. He had touched the edge of something deeper. Keanu's stillness wasn't passive. It was potent, controlled, grounded in something ancient. Something Seagal had once studied but never fully embraced. He remembered the early days of his own training, before fame, before ego clouded intention. There had been a time he respected silence. Now, standing across from Keanu, that memory ached like a bruise he forgot he had. But he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. He charged again. A low sweep aimed at Keanu's ankle, meant to unbalance, to force motion. Keanu allowed it. His foot lifted in sync with the sweep, avoiding contact altogether. He pivoted, flowed like a reed in water, and landed softly. No panic, no tension. He didn't fight the motion, he moved with it. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. A young Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach, watching from the sideline, muttered to his colleague, "This is what happens when someone trains for awareness, not dominance." The commentator at the edge of the mat, stunned into silence, finally found his voice. "Geez, that was incredible. Keanu is showing something we rarely see at expos like this. It's not flash, it's understanding." Seagal turned, panting now, frustration in his jawline. One more try. A series of rapid strikes. Elbows, fists, sweeps. Closer to street fighting than form. The crowd tensed. This was no longer demonstration. It was veering toward confrontation. But Keanu's response was the same. He didn't attack. He dissolved. Each movement was deflected, with economy. No wasted energy, no counters thrown. His hands guided, his feet repositioned, his eyes locked on Seagal's center. Not with challenge, but with presence. Then came the moment. Seagal threw a final spinning strike. Keanu stepped inside it, impossibly close. Too close. He tapped Seagal's chest once with 2 fingers. The strike didn't land with force, but the implication did. He could have ended it. He didn't. The sound of that single touch echoed louder than applause. And then, stillness. The crowd froze. For a beat, no one moved. No one spoke. Even Seagal held his breath. It was over. Not by knockout, not by domination, but by acknowledgement. Keanu bowed deeply, not to claim victory, but to offer closure. His eyes didn't hold triumph. They held compassion. Seagal exhaled sharply. Then, without a word, he stepped back and returned the bow. It was slight, but it was real. The silence broke. Applause rose, slowly at first. Then, like thunder, martial artists wept. Students cheered. The old masters nodded, tears in their eyes. This wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson, and everyone there knew they had just witnessed something sacred. The tension in the arena rippled like static electricity. Seagal adjusted his stance, jaw tight, nostrils flaring. He had expected Keanu to crumble under pressure, maybe back off or apologize. But instead, the man had stood tall, with a kind of quiet defiance. The audience sensed the shift. The match had moved beyond fists and techniques. It had become something deeper, an unspoken clash of ideologies. Seagal's voice broke through the silence again, louder this time, the tone sharp with irritation. "You can't win a real fight with meditation, Reeves." Gasps scattered through the arena. Even among martial artists who admired Seagal's combat background, the brashness of his words felt heavy-handed in a space meant to honor tradition and mutual respect. Keanu didn't respond right away. He adjusted his footing slowly, deliberately, as if settling into a deeper current beneath the surface. Then, in a calm voice that cut through the noise without raising itself, he answered, "If you need to win," Keanu said, "you've already lost something." The words didn't carry venom, they carried weight. A hush fell. Even the rustle of robes and whispers halted. Master Tanaka, watching from the front row, let his fingers press gently together, like a silent nod of approval. He understood the deeper meaning. Seagal's eyes narrowed. Big words for someone who hasn't landed a single hit. Keanu tilted his head slightly, breathing slow and steady. Hitting was never the goal. Before Seagal could offer a retort, he lunged forward again, this time with a spinning back fist, more flair than function. Keanu pivoted with barely emotion, letting the strike pass through the space he had just occupied. Then, with a turn of his wrist and a shift of his shoulder, he redirected Seagal's momentum, guiding him off balance just enough to make him reset. Again, the crowd murmured. Every move Keanu made seemed small, insignificant, but the outcome was undeniable. He was not resisting Seagal. He was erasing the intention behind every strike. A martial artist in the second row leaned toward his companion. "That's not blocking," he whispered. "That's internal redirection. Tai Chi principle. Aikido principle. Energy absorption. He's blending, not clashing." Seagal grunted, frustrated. His next strike was sharp and linear, aimed at Keanu's midsection. But again, Keanu stepped not back, not forward, but sideways, a crescent arc of movement that let the strike pass without impact. He placed his palm lightly on Seagal's forearm, not to push, but to feel the tension, and let it defuse. The contrast grew starker. Seagal's attacks came in waves, fast, hard, demanding attention. Keanu responded with silence, stillness, softness that seemed to swallow force whole. And for the first time, sweat began to bead on Seagal's brow. Seagal stepped back and shook his arms out, trying to disguise his growing frustration as a warm-up reset. But the strain in his shoulders betrayed him. His breathing was heavier now. His forehead glistened under the hot lights. Keanu, meanwhile, hadn't broken a sweat. The arena, once roaring, had fallen into a reverent silence, broken only by the soft creak of wooden floor panels and the occasional gasp from stunned observers. The contrast was undeniable. This wasn't just a sparring match. It was a living metaphor for two opposing philosophies. Seagal's face tightened. "You call this martial arts? All you're doing is dodging." Keanu didn't answer immediately. He took a few steps in a circle, maintaining his composure, reading Seagal's energy, not his fists. Then, he looked the man in the eye and said, "Martial arts begins where the desire to dominate ends." More murmurs rippled through the audience. Two teenage black belts sitting near the front exchanged looks of awe. One whispered, "I thought Keanu was just an actor. That's different." Seagal charged again, this time with a flurry of palm strikes meant to overwhelm. Each motion was tight, well-practiced, forceful, but Keanu moved like water, flowing around the storm. His hands met Seagal's not with resistance but redirection, a guiding touch at the wrist, a pivot of the hips, a rotation of the torso. It looked effortless, almost lazy, but the effect was surgical. Every strike dissolved into the space around Keanu, never landing, never meeting bone or skin with intent. "See how he uses minimal motion," said a quiet voice from the back. It was an older woman, a former martial arts instructor. "It's not evasion, it's philosophy. It's yin to Seagal's yang." Gesture. Now even those who had doubted Keanu in the beginning leaned forward, drawn in by the quiet poetry of his style. Every gesture seemed to whisper a lesson about restraint, about control, about peace. Seagal snarled, "You're not proving anything." Keanu held his ground, eyes steady. "I'm not here to prove, I'm here to share." And in that moment, something changed. The crowd wasn't watching for hits anymore. They weren't watching to see who would win. They were watching to understand. Something deep inside the performance had peeled back the hunger for blood and replaced it with a curiosity for meaning. Seagal hesitated, just for a breath, long enough for everyone to see it. Keanu didn't press the advantage. He didn't strike or counter. He simply stood there, open, unguarded, present. And that silence hit harder than any punch could have. Seagal's breathing grew heavier. His brow, usually smooth with confidence, now furrowed under the strain. He launched another strike, this time a sweeping back fist meant to show dominance, but Keanu shifted an inch. That was all. No aggression, No retaliation, just the art of non-resistance. The force of Seagal's own momentum pulled him slightly off balance. He recovered, but the subtle imbalance didn't go unnoticed. A few martial artists in the front rows exchanged quiet glances, their eyes widening in recognition. Keanu wasn't simply avoiding Seagal's blows. He was making the man confront his own overextension, his need to dominate, his craving to be seen. From the edge of the arena, Master Tanaka leaned forward. His weathered face held no smile, no frown, just the stillness of a man who had seen too many styles confuse motion for mastery. He watched as Keanu raised his hands again, palms open. It was an invitation, not a defense. "Come back to center," Keanu said, almost a whisper. Seagal grunted. "Santa won't help you in a real fight." Keanu stepped aside again, the movement small but complete. Seagal's hand missed, skimming air. The crowd gasped, not from impact, but from what didn't happen. The power in restraint was clearer now than any punch. Somewhere in the back, a group of younger martial artists started clapping slowly. Not for Seagal, not for a strike, but for the unseen art. Control, patience, presence. Sweat now ran in lines down Seagal's face. His movements, once theatrical and broad, began tightening. He was adjusting, trying to match the pace. But Keanu didn't move faster in response. He moved slower, softer, like flowing water. And that's what finally broke the illusion. Seagal lunged with frustration, a low front kick aimed at Keanu's midsection. Keanu, calm as ever, rotated on the ball of his foot, letting the kick pass. Then, with just 2 fingers, he pressed gently against Seagal's shoulder. It was like a lever had been released. Seagal stumbled, not hurt, not thrown, but redirected with such elegance it looked choreographed. But it wasn't. The audience stood, not because someone fell, but because something fell away. Ego, bravado, noise. In its place was a silence so full it roared. A moment where everything was clear. Keanu bowed his head. "I didn't come here to beat anyone," he said, "only to remind us all what it means to move with intention." The stillness lingered, and this time, when the applause came, it was not polite. It was thunder. The echo of applause hadn't fully faded when Seagal stepped back, his chest rising faster now, his face tight with something more than fatigue. For a moment, it looked like he might bow, acknowledge the lesson he'd just been handed. But then a shadow passed over his eyes. Something old, something bitter. He took a deep breath and lunged again, this time faster, meaner. His foot swept low in a technique that hadn't been agreed upon. It was closer to a combat maneuver than a demonstration move. The crowd stirred, sensing the shift in tone. Keanu moved with grace, sidestepping the sweep, but this time he didn't just avoid, he redirected. His hand touched Seagal's back lightly, guiding him past. The movement had no aggression, but it had weight, authority. Seagal caught himself before stumbling, but glared back. Then came another punch, high, aimed at Keanu's head. Keanu ducked, stepping in instead of away. His body flowed past Seagal's arm like silk sliding off a blade. Again, no counterattack, just precision and calm deflection. But Seagal wasn't done. The next strike was a roundhouse kick, sharp and high, aimed near Keanu's shoulder. The crowd gasped. It was no longer a performance. It was a challenge, a provocation. Keanu spun just enough to let the kick pass, inches from his body. No anger, no shift in breath, just that same centered presence. But now his stance lowered slightly. His eyes sharpened. His left foot moved, angling toward the side instead of away. He was preparing, still not to fight, but to contain. Seagal, red-faced, shouted something under his breath. Another barrage came. 2 strikes to the body, a heel coming low. Keanu responded with the same fluid rhythm. Turn, redirect, absorb, yet each redirection was closer now, tighter. His body almost mirrored Seagal's as they moved, one loud, forceful and bracing, the other quiet, adaptive and precise. The energy in the arena changed. The crowd leaned forward, no longer cheering, no longer clapping, just silence and breath. They weren't watching a show anymore. They were watching the thin edge between control and collapse. Seagal threw a punch that missed Keanu by a hair. Keanu rotated his hips and flowed around the incoming arm, placing a hand gently near Seagal's ribs and guiding him away, just enough, just before the point of contact. From the sidelines, a few martial arts veterans were no longer sitting. They stood now, their eyes wide, their arms crossed tightly. This wasn't standard demo etiquette anymore. It was a chess match at lightning speed. One man pushing the rules, the other refusing to break them. And still, Keanu hadn't struck once. Just movement, stillness in motion. Even so, the air felt electric. One wrong move, one emotional slip, and this entire expo could turn into a spectacle no one could walk away from unchanged. Seagal's movements grew heavier, less precise. Sweat rolled down his temple. His footwork, once theatrical and measured, now smacked against the mat with the weight of frustration. He barked, "Stand and fight!" loud enough for the entire arena to hear. Keanu didn't respond with words. He simply breathed and waited. Seagal came again, this time a flurry, elbow, knee, open palm meant to strike the chest. Techniques from multiple disciplines, not all were part of the exhibition code. The audience recognized it. Some gasped, some frowned. Takashi, the host, looked worried from the sidelines. He half raised a hand, unsure whether to call for a pause. But Keanu handled the barrage like water around stone. His shoulder dipped at the exact moment of the elbow. His step aligned perfectly with the incoming knee, redirecting its force into the open air. And when the palm came forward, Keanu placed 2 fingers gently against Seagal's wrist, guiding it off course with nothing but angles and presence. It wasn't just martial arts. It was poise under pressure. It was philosophy in motion. The crowd, spellbound, stayed completely still. Even phones stopped recording. It was like watching a dance at the edge of fire. A demonstration that no longer needed narration. Yet Keanu's restraint made the stakes feel higher. The more Seagal pushed, the more dangerous it felt. Not because of Keanu, but because everyone watching sensed what might happen if he finally chose to respond with force. A few more steps, another flurry. Keanu moved closer, never aggressive, but never retreating either. He placed himself in the narrow space between Seagal's attack and a loss of control. He became the calm within chaos, a silent answer to a shouted challenge. Seagal grunted as one of his strikes landed, on air again. He spun, foot sweeping wide, desperate for contact. Keanu moved just in time, lifting his leg in a Tai Chi-inspirited pivot that drew applause from the practitioners in the audience. Not because it was flashy, because it was honest, efficient, centered. Someone whispered from the crowd, "He's not even trying to win." Another voice added, "That's not the point." Keanu repositioned once more, back now facing the arena's center, Seagal coming from behind in a forceful sprint. Keanu heard it, felt it, and with the softest breath, he turned. Not fast, not dramatic, just in time to place a hand against Seagal's chest and shift his weight. Seagal stumbled, not because of impact, but because the momentum had nowhere else to go. He caught himself, barely, chest heaving now. And finally, he hesitated, not because he was tired, but because something deeper was starting to shake. For a moment, Seagal didn't move. He stood with his arms slightly outstretched, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on Keanu like a man trying to decipher a language he thought he understood. His ego, sharp and aggressive moments ago, now faltered in the face of something far more powerful than brute strength: complete inner control. Keanu's stance never changed. He didn't chase, didn't flinch. He simply stood with the quiet presence of someone who had nothing to prove. The silence in the arena deepened. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the shifting feet of restless spectators, even the sound of a child whispering, "Is he okay?" from somewhere in the upper seats. Then Seagal stepped forward again, but this time slower. The rage was still there, but something else was creeping in. Doubt. Uncertainty. The more he attacked, the more he looked exposed. The more he reached for dominance, the more he lost his balance, both physically and emotionally. He lunged again. A sloppy strike, off angle, telegraphed. Keanu didn't even step away. He leaned in, placed a hand softly on Seagal's shoulder, and spoke, so gently it barely traveled past the two of them. "You don't have to fight me to be seen." Seagal froze, not because of the contact, but because of the words. The meaning struck deeper than any punch could have. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of energy that was neither applause nor shock, just pure, suspended silence. Seagal looked down. His fists loosened. The fire in his chest didn't go out, but it dimmed, turned inward. For the first time in his long career, on a stage meant to glorify dominance, he found himself face to face with something he hadn't trained for. Humility in motion. A staff member approached the edge of the mat, clearly ready to call it off, but Keanu gently raised one hand. Just one. The motion was graceful, reassuring, like asking the world to wait, to breathe. He turned slightly, giving Seagal a wide path to reset his stance. It was a gift, an unspoken offer to start again, not just the demonstration, but the energy between them. And Seagal, still panting, still proud, lowered his eyes. Then he nodded. It wasn't surrender. It was something rarer. Recognition. The crowd erupted, not in victory, not in triumph, but in awe. They had come for a clash of titans. What they witnessed instead was a masterclass in restraint, grace, and the power of walking away with dignity intact. And even Steven Seagal, warrior of decades, knew what had just happened. He had escalated, but Keanu never did. And somehow, that made all the difference. The atmosphere inside the Expo hall shifted the moment Seagal lunged. His body twisted into a low, aggressive sweep kick, an old-school Aikido tactic modified with force, not flow. It was designed to knock a man off his feet and into submission. The crowd saw it before Keanu did, but even that slight delay didn't matter. Keanu moved with the precision of someone not reacting, but anticipating. His right foot slid back, his torso pivoted, like a tree catching the wind instead of resisting it. One hand touched Seagal's arm, not hard, just enough to steer it further off course, sending Seagal's momentum outward instead of into him. And that's when it happened. With Seagal unbalanced and off-center, Keanu stepped in. Not with a strike, not with an aggressive finish, but with complete presence. His right fist rose up, guided by the open path Seagal had unintentionally created. It stopped, cold and absolute, just inches from Seagal's jaw. The fist didn't tremble. Keanu's shoulders didn't shake. He was calm, breathing evenly, his eyes locked on Seagal's. And Seagal didn't flinch. He froze. The entire arena froze with him. People in the back stood taller to see what had just occurred. Those closer to the mats leaned forward, hands instinctively covering their mouths. Cell phones shook in hands that suddenly weren't so steady, and the sound, the absence of it, spread like wildfire. There had been no punch, but it didn't matter, because every martial artist in that room, every fan, every casual observer who thought they came for entertainment, understood what they had just witnessed. That fist, still and controlled, was not a strike. It was a choice. Keanu could have ended the match right then. A slight push forward and Seagal would have been down. Dignity bruised, reputation shaken, perhaps even physically hurt. But Keanu didn't move. He simply lowered his fist. The message was clear and spoken not with words, but with restraint. This wasn't about domination. Who dared to do it? Somewhere in the front row, a teenage student whispered, "That's real power." His instructor beside him just nodded. Master Tanaka, seated in the honored guest row, placed his hand over his heart. His expression didn't change, but his eyes held the kind of respect that transcended generations. That gesture, the almost punch, echoed every philosophy Tanaka had spent his life teaching. Control, compassion, clarity. Steven Seagal slowly straightened. He didn't say anything, didn't try to reclaim the moment with a comment or clever gesture. He knew, everyone did. For all the strikes thrown and dodged that afternoon, this moment, this fist that never landed, would define the entire demonstration. And perhaps more than that, it would define something larger. It wasn't just about martial arts anymore. It was about the kind of man Keanu had chosen to be. A stunned quiet held the arena hostage for several long seconds. Then, slowly, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Whispers of awe, disbelief, and respect. You could hear phrases passing from mouth to mouth like waves washing up on shore. Hell didn't hit him. It could have. Hell chose not to. But Keanu didn't bask in it. He stepped back quietly, giving Seagal space to regain composure. His shoulders relaxed, arms falling gently to his sides. It wasn't showy, it was intentional. He didn't want to escalate. He wanted the room to breathe again. And eventually, it did. A slow, unsure applause began from one corner of the hall. A woman, older, possibly a martial arts teacher herself, clapped not for victory, but for values. Then another joined, then another. And in seconds, the entire arena was on its feet, thundering with applause that felt less like celebration and more like gratitude. Not one punch had landed. And yet, it was one of the most powerful moments in martial arts history. Seagal, for his part, lowered his arms too. For the first time since the demonstration began, there was no tension in his shoulders, no flare in his stance. He looked at Keanu, not with rivalry or resentment, but with something closer to recognition. He wasn't beaten. He was reminded. He took a breath, nodded, and spoke just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You've still got it." Keanu, ever humble, gave the smallest smile. "I never wanted to lose it." But the real statement had already been made. That frozen moment, fist at the jaw, would be captured from every angle. Photographers caught the symmetry of stillness between two fighters. Phones caught the twitch in Seagal's expression, the serenity in Keanu's. The video would go viral within hours, titled not Fight of the Year, but something more poetic. The strike that never came. Within online circles, martial arts forums, and spiritual discussion boards, the image of Keanu's restraint would spread with captions like, "This is mastery. Violence withheld is strength revealed. Real warriors walk away." Even the most cynical critics couldn't ignore the weight of what happened. Keanu didn't win a match. He won something greater. But what most of the world didn't see, what no video would fully capture, was the look in the eyes of young people watching from the bleachers. Boys who had come expecting a brawl. Girls who had thought this was just for entertainment. They leaned forward, silent and breathless, holding something inside they couldn't name. A lesson, a moment of transformation, a different kind of hero. For some of them, it was the first time they saw masculinity without aggression, strength without ego. A fight where the point wasn't to crush, but to demonstrate control over self. And in that moment, Keanu wasn't just an actor or a guest. He became a teacher. Steven Seagal, usually the center of every spotlight, stepped back voluntarily. He gestured to Keanu, raising his hand slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. A gesture often reserved for passing respect from one generation to another. Keanu bowed. Nothing theatrical, just respectful, deep enough to mean it. The crowd returned the gesture with applause once again, but this time mixed with cheers. Outside the ring, the murmurs turned to stories. People called friends. Parents whispered to their kids. Instructors turned to students and said, "Did you see that? That's what I've been trying to teach you." It was a punch that never landed, but it hit everyone, and it would linger far longer than any blow ever could. The moment still lingered in the air when a quiet shuffle turned every head. From the far end of the stage, Master Tanaka rose slowly. At 92, he moved like a tree in the wind, ancient but deeply rooted. The crowd, sensing something sacred, fell into reverent silence. His hands, weathered and calloused, were folded in front of him. His eyes, sharp as ever, studied both men standing center stage. He didn't rush. He didn't speak to impress. When he finally did, his voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "You have both reminded us," he said, "that true mastery lies not in domination but in restraint. The world has seen strength. Now let it witness understanding." His words landed like stones dropped into still water. The room didn't erupt in applause. It held its breath, absorbing the weight of what had just been spoken. Then, with a subtle glance toward the ceremonial weapons stand at the side of the arena, Master Tanaka gave a single nod. "Let us go deeper," he said. "Not to fight, but to demonstrate harmony within chaos. I propose a weapons kata. Let us see how energy flows, not just through fists, but through the tools we once used for war." Seagal looked surprised, then intrigued. "You want us to use weapons?" Tanaka's head tilted slightly. "I want you to show the weapon without becoming it." The phrasing drew thoughtful murmurs from instructors scattered among the audience. It was a challenge wrapped in wisdom, an invitation to something more than spectacle. Seagal shrugged slightly, then rolled his shoulders as if to loosen up. "Why not? Let's give them a show." Keanu, meanwhile, bowed his head softly in acknowledgement. He didn't speak. He simply stepped toward the weapon stand and ran his hand gently over the array of wooden instruments. He bypassed the obvious choices, the katana, the nunchaku, the kama, and settled on the jo staff, a simple, unadorned stick. Modest in appearance, balanced in spirit. Seagal smirked and walked up behind him. He picked up the baken, the wooden sword traditionally used for katana training. It suited him. Aggressive, direct, sharp even in its imitation. The contrast between their choices didn't go unnoticed. "Of course," one young observer whispered, "Reeves picks the peaceful weapon." Master Tanaka returned to his seat and signaled the assistant referees to clear the ring. What had been a demonstration of skill and ego was now becoming something else entirely, an embodiment of values, a meeting of philosophies, a second act with even more at stake, but none of it about winning. The lights dimmed slightly as the arena crew focused a single overhead spotlight on the center of the mat. It wasn't planned, it just happened, like the world around them was preparing to watch a lesson rather than a duel. Keanu stepped first onto the mat, staff gripped loosely in both hands, his posture fluid and alert. Seagal followed, boken held confidently at his side. His movements were sharper, more assertive, but his eyes weren't taunting anymore. There was something else now, a curiosity, a wondering. They bowed to each other, then bowed to Master Tanaka. Then the room once again fell into that rare, sacred silence where every heart beat in sync and every breath waited. Here was God, waiting. The two men stood in ready positions, but there was no bell, no referee, no formal command. Only breath, only focus. Keanu moved first, but not with a strike. He shifted his stance, sliding one foot back and angling his jo staff downward in a gentle, circular sweep. It was a motion drawn from Aike-jo, the peaceful redirection of energy. His body remained calm, his gaze clear. The staff didn't seek conflict. It flowed like water across stone. Seagal, however, raised his bokken high, adopting a traditional kenjutsu posture. Then he advanced with speed, a calculated slash toward Keanu's shoulder. The wood sliced the air, sharp in its path. But Keanu didn't block it. He absorbed it. With a subtle turn of his hips, he guided the bokken downward using the jo's length, controlling the arc and redirecting Seagal's force past his side. It was less of a defense and more of an invitation, letting the energy complete itself without landing. The crowd gasped, not because of the near strike, but because of the trust. Keanu hadn't flinched, and Seagal, for a brief moment, looked surprised that his attack didn't connect, and even more surprised that Keanu hadn't needed to stop it violently. The dance began. Seagal attacked again, this time with a feint followed by a spinning horizontal slash. His footwork was powerful, rooted in decades of sword drills, but Keanu's responses were never about matching force with force. He spun the jo with minimal effort, always meeting the bokken at angles, never straight on. It was elegant, quiet, precise, and slowly something shifted in the audience. What began as a demonstration started to look like something else, like a mirror held up between two ideas. Seagal's sword was an extension of authority, strength, and tradition. Keanu's staff was a conduit of presence, balance, and empathy. Where Seagal sought openings, Keanu closed gaps. Where one pressed forward, the other gave way and returned. Then it happened. A moment that no one expected. Seagal launched a downward cut with clear intensity, perhaps more than was appropriate. It was fast. Too fast. Keanu dropped to one knee, rotating the staff upward. The jo caught the bokken mid-swing with a soft thud. The pressure reverberated, but Keanu didn't push back. He simply let the bokken slide along the jo and come to a rest against his shoulder. And then, instead of countering, he lowered his staff entirely. The arena froze. Seagal stood with the bokken pressed lightly to Keanu's body, but it wasn't victory. It was exposure. Because in that moment, every martial artist in the room saw the truth. Keanu could have retaliated. He had the angle, the speed, the control. But he didn't. He surrendered the illusion of battle, and in doing so, ended it. Even Seagal realized it. His arm lowered, his eyes scanned Keanu's calm face, still breathing steady, still not gloating, still not reacting with ego. Then Seagal did something unexpected. He stepped back. He bowed. Not deeply, but enough. Enough to acknowledge that the greater strength had nothing to do with weapons. It had everything to do with choosing not to use them. From Master Tanaka's chair came a small smile, a proud one. He closed his eyes and nodded once. A ripple moved through the audience. Respect, reverence, and silence. Because sometimes the loudest statement is made when no one speaks at all. The energy in the arena had shifted. What once felt like a performance now felt like something sacred. The air carried a quiet intensity as the two men returned to their positions, wooden weapons in hand. Keanu held the jo staff lightly in his fingers, posture centered and relaxed. Seagal's grip on the bokken was firmer now, more determined. This wasn't about display anymore. It was about proving something. Maybe to the audience, maybe to each other, or maybe to themselves. The moment resumed with no announcement. Seagal lunged forward with a strong diagonal slash aimed at Keanu's torso. The bokken moved like a blade, swift and sharp, but Keanu didn't meet it with force. He rotated the jo in a smooth arc, redirecting the strike downward, then stepping just out of range. No clash, no resistance, only balance. Seagal came again, this time faster, a rising cut toward Keanu's head. Keanu raised the Joe vertically and let the bokken slide along its length, absorbing the impact and guiding it harmlessly away. His feet moved in quiet harmony with his upper body, everything flowing, never bracing. It was as if the force of Seagal's strikes was being swallowed by the silence between motions. The contrast was unmistakable. Seagal's approach was rooted in power. Solid stances, direct angles, bold attacks. They were trained movements from years of Aikido and sword technique. Disciplined, practiced, and effective. Keanu's response was entirely different. His Joe didn't fight back. It adapted. It welcomed pressure and redirected it like water weaving through stone. For a moment, it looked like Seagal might overpower him. A rapid triple strike pushed Keanu backward, left, then right, then straight down the center. But Keanu's staff moved like it was part of his breath. No panic, just rhythm. Each strike found no purchase because there was nothing rigid to land on. And then the shift happened. Seagal went for a disarm, an aggressive move meant to wrench the Joe from Keanu's hands. His bokken hooked around the staff and twisted hard. But instead of resisting, Keanu released one hand, spun with the movement, and used the momentum to slide behind Seagal. The Joe tapped gently at the back of Seagal's leg, enough to unbalance, never to injure. Seagal stumbled forward. Not much, just a step, but enough to feel it. He turned, eyes sharp now, not angry, but something deeper. Challenged, maybe even humbled. Keanu stepped back into a neutral stance. His breathing had not changed. No words, no glares, no victory stance, only readiness. The crowd sat silent. They weren't just watching a duel, they were watching a conversation. Every strike, every redirection was a sentence. And Keanu, though he said nothing with his mouth, was speaking through motion. His silence was no longer passive. It was powerful. And everyone in that arena began to feel it. Not just see it, but feel it. Like a quiet truth that couldn't be shouted. Seagal's expression tightened, his brow furrowed with something not quite anger, but not quite peace either. He stepped back into position, lifting his bokken again, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He struck downward with full commitment, a powerful arc meant to push Keanu into defense. But Keanu didn't retreat. He stepped forward. His Joe met the bokken not with force, but with intention. He slid under the blade, redirecting it to the side, pivoting his body so he was no longer in the line of attack. The sound of wood brushing against wood echoed softly through the arena. The Joe never swung. It turned, it flowed, it moved like it belonged to something older than either man. Seagal attacked again. Sideswipe, jab, overhead slash. Each was technically correct, delivered with precision. His years of training were undeniable. But they were built on the idea of stopping an opponent, of ending a confrontation with authority. That was the root of his method. Control through dominance. Keanu's jaw moved in contrast, not to beat or win, but to empty the space where conflict could land. A spiral here, a sidestep there, a block that dissolved into a redirection. He never tried to land a hit, he simply made sure none landed on him. And the more he did, the more the audience leaned in. The energy changed. It was no longer a question of who would win, but of what it meant to win at all. Keanu used his staff to gently guide Seagal's bokken downward after a wide swing. He didn't press forward, he didn't capitalize. He simply allowed Seagal the space to reset. That gesture, subtle as it was, carried weight. It wasn't surrender. It was restraint. Mercy without weakness. Someone in the audience whispered, barely audible, "He could have ended it again." Another voice followed, "He's not here to win." The realization spread like a ripple. Keanu wasn't proving anything. He was revealing something. The jo staff, a simple weapon of farmers and monks, became a symbol in his hands, not of power, but of harmony. Every deflection was a decision. Every moment he didn't retaliate was a choice. He had nothing to prove, only something to live out. Seagal, breathing heavier now, took a long moment to pause. His eyes locked on Keanu, and for the first time, there was no performance in them, only curiosity. He lunged again, but slower this time, not as an attack, but as a test. A diagonal slash pulled short at the end. Keanu moved, barely shifting, and met it with the same grace as before. No resistance, just understanding. Seagal stepped back and circled, his shoulders lowered slightly. Then, for the first time in the entire event, he changed the rhythm. He feinted left, stepped right, and launched a high-speed thrust aimed at Keanu's shoulder, one of his signature moves. Keanu pivoted, dropped his center, and guided the Bakken upward with the jo in a rising crescent. The momentum forced the Bakken skyward. In the same motion, Keanu rotated and used the staff's tail to tap Seagal's wrist. Light enough not to harm, firm enough to shift his balance. Seagal's grip faltered and the Bakken wobbled. Keanu didn't follow through. He could have. Instead, he stepped back and lowered his jo. There was no applause, just breathless silence. Seagal stared at him, not in anger, not even in frustration, but with the dawning recognition of something he'd never fully grasped. This wasn't a contest, it was a mirror. And what Keanu had shown him wasn't defeat, it was self-awareness. Master Tanaka stood from his seat. His voice, calm and commanding, echoed through the space. "That," he said, "is balance." Keanu bowed. Seagal bowed back. And for the first time all day, it felt real. The weapons were lowered. The arena remained still. Because everyone there knew they had just witnessed something more than a demo. They had seen a masterclass in humility, patience, and inner strength. And though no strike had landed, a powerful message had. Seagal returned to center with a quiet intensity. His grip on the Bakken tightened. His jaw set, but it wasn't about showmanship anymore. Something deeper stirred beneath his surface. Pride, perhaps, mixed with the sting of realization. The crowd's silence had been more deafening than any boo or cheer, and the way Keanu had offered space instead of taking victory, it unsettled him. He lunged again, hard, faster than before, not elegant, not refined, just brute speed, a downward slash aimed with force and frustration. The sound of wood cutting air was sharp and violent. Keanu stepped into the attack. He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He entered the strike zone with precise calm. His jo met the Bakken at its apex, not clashing, but redirecting. The energy of Seagal's swing folded around Keanu's staff like water around stone. In one fluid motion, Keanu rotated his core and lifted the jo, guiding the Bakken over his shoulder and out of line. Then he stepped in closer. Before Seagal could recover, Keanu used the staff's tail to sweep Seagal's legs. It wasn't a hard strike. It didn't knock him flat, but it broke his stance just enough for the Bakken to loosen in his hand. Keanu pivoted. A small twist of the jo, and the Bakken flew from Seagal's grip. It hit the floor with a sharp clap. Seagal stood defenseless. Keanu, with the fluid precision of someone in complete control, brought the jo up. Not with aggression, but with balance. He stopped the tip of the staff an inch from Seagal's throat. The crowd gasped, not because they feared violence, but because they understood the choice in that moment. Keanu could have ended it. He could have humiliated him. But once again, he didn't. He froze, then slowly, deliberately lowered the jo. Not a word spoken, just the quiet fall of breath. A ripple went through the audience. First silence, then murmurs, then applause. It began at the back. scattered claps. Then, cheers. The energy flipped like a switch. People weren't just impressed. They were moved by restraint, by dignity, by something they didn't expect to feel in a match between two legends. Keanu turned away, not in arrogance, but as if to say, "It's done." But Seagal didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the man who could have defeated him but chose not to. For a long beat, his face remained unreadable. Then, his posture softened. His arms, once tense, lowered naturally. His shoulders released the weight they'd carried since the match began. Keanu turned back just in time to see it. The slight nod. Subtle, but unmistakable. Seagal bowed. Not deeply, not theatrically, but enough. Enough for everyone watching to understand what it meant. The audience fell completely silent at the sight. Bim. A bow. From Steven Seagal to Keanu Reeves. In the world of martial arts, a bow carried weight. It wasn't about who was stronger or faster. It was about acknowledging something deeper. Spirit, control, mastery, not just over technique, but over ego. And for Seagal, who had built his reputation on dominance, never yielding, always asserting, this moment struck with more power than any strike ever could. People rose to their feet. Some clapped in awe. Others simply stood, arms folded, witnessing something rare. Two titans, recognizing one another in silence. Master Tanaka didn't move. He watched carefully, his old eyes glistening. He understood the layers of that gesture better than most. In the bow, he saw surrender but not defeat. Surrender of pride, of aggression, a kind of rebirth. Keanu bowed in return. Slight, respectful, equal, and then he stepped forward, offering his hand, not as a victor, not as an opponent, but as a fellow man who had just shared something raw and vulnerable. Seagal hesitated. A breath, two, then he accepted it. Their hands met in a firm grip. No show, no raising arms like winners in a ring, just presence. Human. The dojo-style arena held its breath, and when the two men let go, it exhaled. Conversations buzzed in the air, but no one left. No one could. They were anchored to the depth of what had just unfolded. Keanu stepped back and bowed once more to Master Tanaka. This time the old master rose. He did not speak for a long while. He simply walked forward, his steps deliberate, cane in one hand, honor in the other. He approached both men and placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Then he looked into Seagal's eyes. "You remembered," he said softly. Seagal blinked. Master Tanaka turned to Keanu. "And you reminded." The words hung in the air like incense, slow, lingering, sacred. The crowd, sensing the gravity of the moment, stayed silent. Then Tanaka raised his voice, just slightly. This was not combat. This was communion. Applause followed, but not like a stadium roar. It was reverent, like clapping after a moving symphony. Keanu didn't soak it in. He stepped to the side, bowed again, and made space. Seagal remained in place a moment longer. Then, eyes still locked on Tanaka, he whispered something no mic picked up. But by the look on the old master's face, it was enough. A small smile broke through the seriousness. Tanaka nodded. Then, with both men flanking him, he turned toward the audience. "The way of the warrior is not power over another," he said. "It is power over self. When restraint triumphs over reaction, we evolve." The crowd nodded, some visibly emotional, especially the younger martial artists, watching not just a demonstration, but a transformation. Among them, a boy no older than 10 sat on the front row. His hands were clenched around his wooden training stick, eyes wide, absorbing every frame of this encounter. His mother leaned down, whispered something, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. He was changed. Not because someone had won a match, but because someone had chosen not to finish one. The ripple of that decision extended far beyond the arena floor. The moment would replay endlessly online. Headlines would scream about the bow seen around the world. But those who were there, they would remember something different. Not the technique, not the disarm, but the mercy, the stillness, the humanity. Backstage, the world felt quieter. The roar of the crowd had faded into a low murmur, muffled by thick walls and heavy curtains. Keanu Reeves sat alone on a wooden bench in the corner of the green room, a bottle of water resting in his hands. He hadn't taken a sip yet. His breathing was slow, his body still humming with residual energy from the match. But his eyes were calm, not victorious, just grounded. His students filtered in one by one. They had been watching from the private section just off stage. Their faces were a mix of awe and confusion. No one spoke at first. There was a kind of reverence in the air, like they didn't want to break the silence surrounding him. But eventually, one of them stepped forward, a teenage boy named Elijah, who had been training under Keanu for almost 2 years. "Sensei," he said quietly, "why didn't you finish him?" Keanu looked up slowly. He wasn't surprised by the question. In fact, he had anticipated it. He set the bottle down, finally meeting the boy's gaze. There wasn't a trace of disappointment in his expression, only clarity. "I didn't come to win," Keanu replied gently. "I came to reflect something worth remembering." The room went even stiller. Elijah tilted his head, absorbing the words. "But you could have," he said. "Everyone saw it. You had the opening." Keanu gave the faintest smile. "That's the thing. Sometimes when you have the opening, the real strength is choosing not to take it." Another student, a young woman named Miko, stepped forward. "But doesn't that make it look like you held back?" He nodded. "I did hold back. But not out of weakness, out of respect. You don't teach peace by swinging harder. You teach it by showing restraint when it's hardest." There was a long pause. Elijah glanced at the others. They were listening closely now, like this was part of the training they hadn't expected, but somehow needed more than anything else. Then Keanu continued. "People think martial arts is about defeating someone, but it's really about seeing them, seeing their pain, their fear, their history, and choosing how you respond to it." His voice didn't rise. He didn't gesture grandly. He just spoke from the place inside him that had walked through too many storms to need a spotlight anymore. Miko sat down beside him. "You think he'll understand that?" Keanu looked toward the doorway. "I think maybe he already does." Just then, the curtain parted quietly. Steven Seagal stepped into the room alone. No entourage, no fanfare, just him. His eyes scanned the space until they landed on Keanu. The students instinctively shifted, unsure whether to bow or stay seated, but Keanu raised a hand slightly, signaling them to remain still. Seagal stood there a moment, then he took a breath and walked forward. Steven Seagal's steps were slower than before, almost uncertain. His usual air of superiority had dimmed. There was no camera following him, no booming voice to announce his arrival, only the soft shuffle of his boots against the floor. He paused a few feet from Keanu, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither man spoke. The tension in the room was thick, but it wasn't hostile. It was the silence of two men standing on the far ends of a long, unspoken road. Keanu stood up slowly, not with caution, but with quiet presence. He didn't puff his chest or lift his chin. He simply rose to meet a man who had once tried to belittle him in front of the world. "I was wrong," Seagal said, his voice low and raspy. It took everyone by surprise, especially Keanu's students. Miko's breath caught. Elijah's eyes widened. Seagal glanced around at the students. "I've spent most of my life thinking martial arts was about dominance, power, presence. But out there, He looked Keanu directly in the eyes. "You reminded me of something I forgot. Maybe something I never really understood." Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. "It's easy to forget in the noise." Seagal looked down, his hands briefly tightening at his sides. "I came here to prove I was still the man I used to be. Instead, I saw someone I wish I had become." That admission landed heavily. Keanu didn't speak right away. He wanted to give space to the moment. These weren't lines from a script. They were the raw acknowledgments of a man who had spent years building a fortress of ego, only to feel it crumble in the face of quiet strength. "You're still here," Keanu finally said, "which means you're still becoming." Seagal looked up again, and something in his face softened. "I thought your silence was arrogance. I thought you didn't speak because you didn't have anything to say." "Potential. But now?" Keanu asked. Seagal exhaled. "Now I realize your silence was listening." He stepped forward and, in a gesture no one expected, bowed. Not deeply, not theatrically, but with enough weight to make every student in the room feel the earth shift a little beneath them. Keanu returned the bow, just as gently. They stood like that for a breath or two. A warrior's bow, not of defeat, but of mutual understanding. Then Seagal turned to the students. "You're lucky," he said to them. "Your teacher doesn't teach you how to fight. He teaches you how to walk through the world without needing to." The room was quiet again. Then Elijah, ever the bold one, took a half-step forward. "Sir, does that mean you're joining our dojo?" A flicker of amusement crossed Seagal's face. "I don't think I'd survive your warm-ups." The tension finally cracked. Laughter spilled through the room. Not loud, but enough to melt the weight of what had just passed. Keanu sat down again, picking up his bottle of water. He finally took a sip. Seagal remained standing for a moment longer, then nodded once to Keanu. "Thank you for reminding me." Keanu replied softly, "Thank you for walking in." Seagal left the room as quietly as he'd entered, and in his absence, something lingered. A ripple of change, not just in him, but in every young soul who had just witnessed something far more powerful than any punch or throw. It was the kind of moment that didn't fade. It etched itself into memory, into spirit, into the invisible thread that binds true martial artists together across generations. And behind the curtain, far from the roar of the crowd, something deeper had taken place. Not a match, a transformation. The dojo hall had gone still again, the excitement of the match giving way to the gentle hush of reflection. The mats had been cleared, the crowd dispersed. But a quiet space remained untouched, tucked away from the center. An old wooden room with sliding doors and tatami mats, the kind that held conversations too sacred for an audience. Inside, Master Tanaka was already seated, cross-legged beside a low table, a cast-iron teapot resting in front of him. Steam curled upward like incense in a temple. There were 3 cups. Keanu entered first, without words. His presence was calm, centered. He bowed to Tanaka and took his place at one side of the table. A moment later, the door slid open again. Steven Seagal stepped in, eyes uncertain. But he bowed, slower this time. Not as ritual, but as gratitude. Tanaka gestured for him to sit. They formed a triangle around the teapot. 3 men at very different points in their lives, but somehow orbiting the same moment. Tanaka poured the tea with great care, not rushing even a drop. He handed the first cup to Keanu, then to Seagal, and finally poured one for himself. No one spoke right away. The warmth of the tea and the stillness of the room did the talking for them. Outside, the world buzzed with speculation. Videos of the match were already going viral. Commentators were drawing battle lines. But in here, none of that mattered. Seagal finally broke the silence. "I forgot what this felt like," he said, his hands wrapped around the ceramic cup. "Just silence. Steam. Respect." Tanaka gave a soft nod but said nothing. Keanu looked at him quietly, not pressing, just listening. Seagal went on, "I used to believe in this too. The discipline, the humility, the intention behind every move. But over time," he stared into the steam rising from his tea, "the world changed me." Keanu finally spoke. "Or maybe it just covered you up." That made Seagal glance at him. "You think I'm still that guy?" "I think," Keanu said gently, "you wouldn't have come backstage alone if you weren't." Tanaka smiled. "The world will always try to change you, but the path doesn't move. It waits." Seagal looked down, one finger tracing the rim of his cup. "I was just a kid from Michigan once, practicing throws in a dusty garage. My mom used to say my eyes lit up after training. Then, the fame came, the roles, the need to be bigger than life." He took a breath. "I started confusing fear with respect." Keanu nodded. "It happens to all of us. In different ways." Tanaka sipped his tea. "This is the real training, not what happened on the mat, but what happens after." Seagal's voice was softer now. "I thought winning meant people listened, but watching that crowd, the way they cheered when you didn't strike me, Keanu, I realized I've been chasing applause instead of honor." Keanu didn't answer right away. He let the words linger. Finally, he said, "Sometimes silence teaches louder than sound." Tanaka's eyes gleamed. "There are lessons the world will never televise. That's why tea is served in quiet places." Seagal chuckled, the sound surprisingly light. "You ever feel like the best parts of you get lost under the persona?" Keanu nodded. "All the time. That's why I return to the dojo, to strip away what the world adds." Tanaka refilled their cups. "The warrior drinks tea not to refresh the body, but to awaken the spirit." The three men sat in peaceful stillness again. No stage, no crowd, no armor. Only the tea, the truth, and the path back. Seagal leaned back slightly, his shoulders losing some of the tension they had carried all day. He looked at Tanaka, then at Keanu. "I'm not sure I even know how to return to that path," Tanaka answered calmly. "You don't need to know how. You only need to want to," Keanu added, "and walk it one honest step at a time." The quiet returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was cleansing, like rain after a long drought. Seagal looked at his own hands, calloused yet stiff. "I've spent years building a wall around myself. A wall of image, toughness, control. And now I'm afraid that if I tear it down, I won't recognize what's left." "You will," Keanu said. "What's left is what's real." Tanaka leaned forward, placing his cup down gently. "The real you isn't gone. He's just waiting to be remembered." Seagal looked over at Keanu again. "Why didn't you finish me today? That last strike? You had it, clean." Keanu paused. "Because I wasn't fighting you. I was showing you." "Showing me what?" "Not. You're not my enemy. You're my mirror." The words hung in the air like incense smoke. Seagal's eyes flickered. That hit something deep. Tanaka smiled. "To disarm a man's weapon is skill. To disarm his heart is wisdom." Keanu said nothing more. He simply lifted his cup and drank slowly. Seagal looked away for a moment, swallowing a sudden wave of emotion. "The world doesn't reward restraint, Keanu. It rewards dominance, fame, loudness. I got caught up in it." "I understand," Keanu said, "but maybe that's why we need to be quiet sometimes. To remind the world of something it's forgetting." Seagal shook his head softly. "You never raised your voice, never tried to outshine, but the crowd still stood for you." "They must stood for what they felt," Keanu replied. "Not just for me." Seagal leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice lower now. "Do you think it's too late for me to be that man again?" Tanaka answered first. "The path is always open. It's pride that makes us think we've gone too far to return. Keanu nodded. The hardest step is not the first one. It's the one after we admit we were wrong. A small silence followed, this one necessary. Seagal finally smiled. Not wide, but honest. You know, back in the day, I used to drink tea before every practice. Haven't done that in years. Tanaka poured him another cup. Then welcome back, Keanu said softly. We're not here to erase the past, just to walk forward with eyes open. They sat in stillness, no longer strangers across a table, but men who understood that the truest battles happen inside the self. After a few more minutes, Seagal broke the silence again. What happens now? Tanaka stood slowly, stretching his legs. Now? Now you train, but this time not for the camera, for the soul. Seagal chuckled. That sounds harder. Keanu smiled. It is, but it's worth it. Tanaka opened the sliding door. Outside, the hallway stretched ahead, empty but full of possibility. Before stepping out, Seagal turned to Keanu. Thanks for not finishing me. Keanu replied. Thanks for not walking away. They left the tea room together, not as opponents, not even as actors, but as martial artists. Walking back toward the same path they had both once known. A path they were now choosing again. The sun filtered through the high windows of the dojo, casting gentle beams across the polished wooden floor. The audience was already gathered, murmurs of curiosity mixing with the quiet hum of anticipation. Everyone expected something, though no one knew exactly what. Yesterday's clash had ended in something far deeper than victory, and now there was a different kind of tension in the air, not of competition, but of meaning. When Keanu walked out onto the mat, dressed in a clean white gi, the room quieted. No music, no lights, just the soft rhythm of his bare feet against the floor. He bowed, calmly and deliberately, then took his place in the center of the mat. No fanfare followed, but then another figure stepped onto the floor, Steven Seagal. There was a flicker of surprise in the crowd. He too wore a white gi, simple and clean, no belts, no ranks on display, just presence. His pace was slower, his breath more deliberate. He bowed as well, then stood beside Keanu without a word. The silence deepened. Then Keanu began. His movement was fluid, rooted in years of training. Every gesture was precise, but never rigid. His kata unfolded like a poem in motion, balance, breath, intention. His hands sliced the air in wide arcs, his feet grounded like a tree in wind. There was no aggression, only grace. It was the martial art stripped of ego. As Keanu completed his sequence and stepped back, the room held its breath. Then Seagal stepped forward. He didn't speak either. He moved into soft Aikido rolls, each one a whisper of force redirected. His body flowed, not with the rigidity of someone trying to prove something, but with the weight of someone remembering something. His hands moved in circular paths, guiding invisible energy around him. He didn't rush, he didn't perform, he just moved with sincerity, his breath rising and falling like the tide. Together, it wasn't a performance, it was a message. When Keanu stepped in again, he didn't replace Seagal, he joined him. One moved through stillness, the other through motion. Keanu's kata, strong yet silent, wove seamlessly with Seagal's flowing Aikido. They never touched, yet they danced in rhythm. One extended, the other absorbed. One rooted, the other redirected. It was balance, harmony. Not east and west, not old and new. Just two men reconciling through motion what words could never fully express. No camera flash went off, no applause yet. Just reverent stillness. Among the crowd were students, teachers, martial arts legends, and total newcomers. None of them looked away. Something sacred was happening, not because of celebrity, but because two people had chosen humility over pride, connection over ego. By the time Keanu and Seagal finished, Their breathing was steady, calm. They bowed again, first to each other, then to the crowd. Still, no one clapped, because what they had witnessed wasn't entertainment. It was art. And it was truth. After the final bow, Keanu stepped back and waited. Seagal remained beside him, his eyes downcast for a moment, as if searching for something internal. Then he turned to the audience, not with his usual imposing presence, but with a rare softness in his expression. He gestured subtly to the mat, not a challenge, an invitation. Keanu nodded in quiet agreement. From the edge of the crowd, a young boy, no older than 13, stood up. It was the same boy who had stared in awe yesterday, mimicking every move from the sidelines. His parents hesitated, but Master Tanaka, seated behind them, gave a gentle nod. The boy stepped forward. He bowed awkwardly, his nervous energy trembling through every limb. Seagal bent down slightly and showed him how to breathe, how to ground his feet, how to trust the movement, not force it. Keanu moved closer, kneeling beside them, offering a soft correction to the boy's stance. His voice was never loud, just steady. The boy tried again, slower this time. And this time, he didn't look like a student trying to impress. He looked like someone learning to listen, to his body, to the silence, to the moment. Other students rose. A woman in her 40s, a retired sensei, a wheelchair-bound veteran who had studied judo decades ago. Each came forward, not to perform, but to participate. The mat was no longer a stage. It had become something else, a space of reflection, of return. Seagal demonstrated gentle redirections with open palms, explaining nothing, yet everything was clear. Keanu moved beside him, showing how presence didn't need dominance to be powerful. The two men never took center stage. They stayed at the edge, guiding but never overshadowing. Tanaka finally rose, his steps deliberate. He joined the group and placed one hand on the shoulder of the boy. "This," he said softly, "is what martial arts was always meant to be." The words echoed, not in volume, but in truth. The energy in the room shifted, not as something seen, but something felt. Egos had dissolved, titles had been forgotten. There were no belts, no judges, no winners, only balance, only breath, only people reconnecting. When the last student stepped off the mat, the audience rose not with clapping, but with silence, a standing silence, a shared one. And it lasted for what felt like a full minute. Finally, someone whispered, "Thank you." Then more followed. Not loud cheers, but soft words of gratitude. A woman in the back wept quietly. A teenage boy bowed with his whole body. Even seasoned fighters had misty eyes. Keanu looked over at Seagal. For the first time since they met, Seagal didn't puff his chest or put on a scowl. He gave a nod, one filled with respect, with understanding, and maybe with something deeper. Redemption. They walked off the mat side by side. No cameras followed. No media storm. Just the echo of what they'd left behind. Not a spectacle, but a seed. One that would grow in the minds of every witness long after the dojo lights dimmed, long after the mats were rolled up, long after the names faded. Because they hadn't just demonstrated techniques. They had demonstrated something else. Something forgotten, something timeless. It began with a shaky smartphone video uploaded by someone in the third row. The lighting wasn't great, the angle was off. But the moment it captured was undeniable. Two martial arts legends, once framed as rivals, stood side by side in silence. They moved together, not for glory, but for truth, for something ancient. The video hit a few martial arts forums first. Comments poured in fast. Veterans recognized the techniques, but more importantly, they recognized the restraint, the emotional control, the dignity. Then it reached Reddit. From there, it exploded. Within 48 hours, the video had reached 5 million views. By the end of the week, it had crossed 20. Dozens of languages subtitled it. Entire reaction channels dissected every gesture. Aikido schools saw their classes fill with new students overnight. Karate dojos welcomed parents who had once pulled their kids out, now hoping they could teach them what they'd seen in the clip. The phrase, "Keanu wins with silence," began trending on X. Commentators across disciplines, from jiu-jitsu to boxing to even Olympic wrestling, paused to reflect on what had happened. For decades, martial arts had been drifting towards spectacle. Loud entrances, overhyped rivalries, flash over substance. But that quiet demonstration, it was different. People called it the first punch that never landed. And yet somehow, it hit harder than any strike. News anchors on morning shows played the footage, next to headlines like "Martial Arts finds its soul again" and "When respect becomes revolution." It wasn't just about Keanu or Seagal anymore. It was about everything the moment symbolized. In one Tokyo dojo, a senior sensei paused mid-lesson and wheeled out a TV cart. His students, aged 8 to 72, sat cross-legged on the mat as the video played. When it ended, he simply said, "This is why we bow." In Los Angeles, a group of middle schoolers in a rough neighborhood rewound the moment where Seagal stepped aside and allowed a child onto the mat. Again and again. They didn't talk much, but the message landed. It wasn't just martial artists watching. Therapists began referencing the video in sessions about conflict resolution. Leadership coaches included it in corporate training about power dynamics. Clergy used it in sermons about humility and restraint. The ripple went far beyond punches or kata. It reached places people never expected. An editor from a major lifestyle magazine published a feature called "The Day Two Men Showed the World What Manhood Really Means." The article went viral for a second time. Even critics of celebrity culture had to admit, this wasn't just performative. There was no sponsorship, no press conference, no merch line, just two men choosing to honor something bigger than themselves. In Brazil, a jiu-jitsu master named Rodrigo uploaded a reaction video. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We teach defense, we teach calm." But what I saw in that video reminded me why I fell in love with martial arts in the first place. It's not about winning. It's about becoming. He wasn't alone. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, martial arts academies saw record spikes in sign-ups. Parents wrote emails saying, "My child saw the video and asked to learn what Keanu did." Others shared personal messages on social media. "I thought I was too old, but this video made me believe I could begin again." The impact wasn't just emotional, it was structural. Several governing bodies for martial arts competitions began re-evaluating their scoring systems. Emphasis shifted toward control, character, and restraint, not just technique or aggression. One federation even proposed a new annual award, the Keanu Spirit Medal, reserved for the competitor who demonstrates integrity above all. Schools and teachers weren't the only ones inspired. Artists, musicians, and poets all chimed in. A famous Korean calligrapher painted a massive scroll titled "The Bow." It showed two brushstrokes, one steady and sharp, the other curved and flowing, merging into one quiet gesture. It was displayed in a national museum with the caption, "Inspired by a moment the world needed." A hip-hop artist sampled audio from the demonstration, setting Keanu's quote, "I didn't come to win, I came to reflect something worth remembering," against a beat built from heartbeats, footsteps on a mat, and ambient crowd noise. The track shot to #1 on independent charts within days. At a university in the Midwest, a philosophy professor paused his lecture on Nietzsche and played the video in silence. Then he wrote 2 words on the board: "Power, withheld." A student later tweeted a photo of it with the caption, "This taught me more than any textbook ever could." The resonance was deep, Because the story defied modern expectations. In a culture trained to escalate, to clap back, to dominate, Keanu chose pause. Seagal, the man once known for intensity and force, chose something even harder: to be still. And because they were who they were, legends with reputations, the act meant even more. This wasn't an unknown monk in a distant temple. It was Hollywood's most stoic action star and a martial arts icon many had dismissed as outdated. And together, they made humility cool again. Youth groups hosted screenings of the event. Community centers labeled their programs the Way of the Bow. A viral campaign on TikTok encouraged people to post stories of moments when they chose the quiet path. Thousands responded, using hashtags like Silent Strength and Keanu's Way. One father shared a clip of his son bowing after a local sparring match, win or lose. He captioned it, "He saw the video. He understood." Another woman, a veteran with PTSD, posted a long comment under the original video. "I've struggled with rage and reaction, but this taught me that holding back can be stronger than striking out. I'm starting again. Thank you." At a private charity gala a month later, Keanu was asked about the moment. As usual, he shrugged off praise. "It wasn't about me," he said. "It was about the message, and the message has been here long before me." When reporters turned to Seagal, he offered only one sentence: "We all forget. That day helped me remember." Headlines that week echoed a common theme. The punch that never landed changed the world. Some called it theater, others said it was staged. But for the millions who watched with open hearts, it was something else entirely. It was proof that character, grace, and restraint still matter. And sometimes the most powerful thing a warrior can do is nothing. You don't train for the spotlight. You don't lace up your belt, tie your gi, and step onto the mat hoping for applause. You train for the unseen hours, the lonely repetitions, the quiet battles within yourself. That's where it all begins, and that's where it's tested. Most people think discipline is about doing something hard, but real discipline is doing something invisible. No one claps when you don't strike back. No one cheers when you breathe and walk away. But those moments, those are the real victories, the ones that live in your character, not on the screen. That day at the Expo, when Steven Seagal stepped onto the mat and squared up, the crowd held its breath. Everyone expected a clash, some even wanted it. Two names, two legends, one mat. But what they got instead was a silence more powerful than thunder. Because martial arts isn't about domination, it's about dignity. You see, I didn't come there to win. I didn't need to. I came to reflect something that was given to me long ago by my teachers, my mentors, and even strangers who showed me a better way. I came to remind myself, and maybe others, that the mat is sacred, not just for showing skill, but for showing who you really are. Steven didn't need to bow that day, but he did. And that bow didn't go to me. It went to something greater. To every teacher we ever had. To every code we ever tried to live by, even when we failed. And I want to say something to anyone listening right now. You'll face your own mat one day. It won't have lights or cameras. It might be a hallway confrontation, a moment of betrayal, a time when someone tests your patience, your restraint, your sense of justice. And when that moment comes, ask yourself, not can I win, but can I hold who I am? Because holding who you are when it's easier to let go, that's the mark of someone who's really trained. I've made mistakes, plenty. But that day I remembered something I learned from an old sensei in Kyoto. He said, "The most dangerous man is the one who doesn't need to prove anything." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Some people still ask me, "Why did you just show him up? You could have." And the truth is, maybe I could have. But if I had, the story would have been about ego, and that's never the story I want to tell. I'd rather tell the story of two men standing still, because stillness, when it's chosen, not forced, is strength. What would you have done in my place? Would you have fought back? Would you have tried to win? Or would you have trusted the silence to speak louder than words? Pause. Think about that. I believe every one of us carries something powerful. Not fists, not fame, but something deeper. The choice to choose peace when chaos wants to drag us in. The courage to be calm when pride wants to explode. That moment at the Expo, it wasn't about martial arts. It was about manhood. It was about maturity. It was about remembering that being strong doesn't mean being loud. It means being steady. When the footage went viral, people called it many things. Some said it was staged. Others called it wise. But the ones who understood, the martial artists, the teachers, the quiet warriors out there living everyday discipline, they knew exactly what it was. It was a return to the roots. Martial arts was never about fighting. It was about finishing the fight before it starts, about mastering yourself so deeply that no one else controls your hands, your heart, or your story. I stood on that mat with a man who once walked away from the path, but he came back. And maybe he only came back for a day, but that day mattered. That tea ceremony with Master Tanaka changed something, not just in Steven, but in me, because I saw something I didn't expect. A man tired of the noise, ready to listen. And sometimes, that's all we really need. Not a lecture, not a lesson, just a moment of being still long enough to hear who we've become. The next day, when we demonstrated side by side, no one clapped at first. And that silence, it was the greatest ovation I've ever received. Not because it fed my ego, but because it meant they were paying attention. Not to me, but to the space between the moves, to the pause between the kata and the roll, to the breath, to the meaning. And I hope you're paying attention too, because this isn't just a story about martial arts. It's about your life, what you do when no one's watching, how you treat people who test your limits, whether you act from impulse or from principle. So if you're still here, listening, maybe you're one of the quiet ones too. The ones who walk away from fights they could win. The ones who stay kind in a world that mistakes kindness for weakness. The ones who keep showing up, not for applause, but for alignment. If that's you, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And your strength matters, even when no one sees it, especially then. So I'll leave you with this. The strongest punch I ever threw was the one I never delivered. The loudest thing I ever said was done in silence. And the greatest honor I've received wasn't a belt or a trophy or a viral video. It was knowing I left that mat without betraying the man I've spent my life becoming. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have answered insult with action? Or would you have chosen restraint and stillness, even if it cost you the crowd? Leave a comment below. Your story might inspire someone else to make a better choice when it matters. And if this incredible story moves you, even a little, share it with someone you respect. If you believe that strength is quiet, that humility is heroic, and that we need more stories like this in the world, then subscribe to the channel. There's more where this came from. More stories that matter. More reminders of who we can be when we choose the better way. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Until next time, keep your stance steady, your heart soft, and your purpose clear. I'll see you in the next incredible story.